All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Art is Talking, presented by Barnes& and Noble. I'm here with Devin Elle Kurtz. Devin, hello.
Hi, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for taking the time to do this. So we are here to talk about Bakery Dragon, which is it's not your first book out there. You've illustrated a bunch of covers and books and stuff, but this is the first time you've been the author and illustrator,
Yes.
which we'll get into the differences there in a second. But I want to first ask, what was the inspiration behind this story in general and this particular dragon?
Yeah, so I was doing a series back in 2020 and 2021, a series of illustrations that were all about giving dragons like more unique hoards. So I drew a dragon on a pile of library books and a dragon on a pile of arcade toys. And one idea that I came up with was that a bakery window filled with golden, delicious bread would look just like a pile of gold from far away. And there's that piece of lore that dragons love gold, and the gears started turning in my head of what if a little dragon who is still new to the world of collecting gold and building a hoard saw a bunch of bakery bread in a window display and thought it looked like a pile of gold from far away, and the whole idea kind of tumbled out from there.
So I love that. So once you have this sort of nugget of an idea, what were your first steps in building it out and finding the story arc?
Yeah, that's so this book actually went through a bunch of different iterations because this was my first author, where I was authoring it as well as illustrating it. I feel like I went through different stages, and the stage that was most impactful for me was when I realized that I could thumbnail the art while I was writing it, and that was when it really came together. So once I realized, I'm such a visual person, it really is helpful for me to put images onto the words that I'm writing. Everything started falling into place because I was thinking, okay, well, I need to draw a place for him to live. And oh, maybe other dragons live in this place that I've just drawn. And what would those dragons look like? And what does the town look like? And maybe there's a baker. What does the baker look like? And I feel like letting myself focus on what everything, looked like first, what were all the players in this story, that really helped me when I went to then storyboard out each story beat. And I feel like I think about these stories in kind of flashes of moments of, oh, well, we need this moment and what will this moment look like? And eventually I just put them all up next to each other and realized that I had the shape of a story.
What a happy little happy little realization. Like, oh, here's my story.
Yeah.
That's great. So I think I read it was either in your bio or somewhere that you've long had a connection to dragons. Like, what is your connection to dragons? What is it about them that is so interesting?
Yeah, I've loved dragons and fantasy creatures ever since I was really little. And one thing that comes to mind was the book Dragon Rider, which was really popular when I was a kid. And I think I got it at maybe even as like a scholastic book fair or something along those lines. I was obsessed with that book, and that led me into like reading a bunch of other dragon books, which was my entry point into fantasy, like as a genre in general. So I have a lot of really fond memories of reading dragon books. And also, when I was a kid, there was a show called Dragon Tales that played on TV that was one of my absolute favorites. I feel like there was such an amazing little golden age of dragon like fiction that came about. There was this book called Dragonology, which was like one of those big Costco books that just had a bunch of beautiful art of dragons. And I feel like that all came together to just burrow into my brain. And the fantasy genre and dragons kind of became tied to each other. They became kind of the same thing in my brain, and I became such a fantasy head that it was just kind of my entry point into all of that.
Do you have a favorite dragon out there? It could be one that you created too. Do you have like a the dragon?
Oh man, I'm gonna go a little bit left field and say Charizard from Pokemon, which I feel
Yes.
like qualifies as, even though it's not even dragon type, I think it still qualifies as a dragon. It's dragon shaped.
That absolutely qualifies, and that what a great choice. Good choice. So, as you mentioned, this is your first time being the author and the illustrator of a book. How does that creation process differ for something like you did the illustrations for the Mother of Sharks, where you were illustrating a story? What was the creation process like, and how did it differ?
I think the fewer boundaries that you have, the harder the art process can be actually. So there's something about, when the story already has its whole shape and you're figuring out how to put pictures to it, it can be a little bit easier to dive in and figure out exactly what choices you want to make. So the first thing that was really helpful for me was understanding what just, the boundaries of picture books as uh type of book were on the whole. So I did a bunch of research of like, oh, there's 32 versus 40 versus 48 page books. What sort of like length and story beats and story complexity is different between those different books? What about the different age groups? Like really understanding kind of the rules of picture books. I read so many. I was going to the library and the bookstore and Barnes and Noble all the time to read picture books. So those were kind of my greater rules that I need to work within. But then it was a process of figuring out what are the rules of the world so that then I can write within those rules. Because as soon as I have, outer boundaries to what I need to do, I feel like that's when I'm able to really dive into my creativity and not feel stressed by the process, but just feel invigorated by like playing in the space. So there were a few more steps to getting there for me. But I feel like now that I have gone through that process, I see kind of, the space that I'm playing within as I'm writing a lot clearer. And I think that gets a little bit easier each time you go through the process. But at first, it was just a few months of like really building myself, what are the rule set for how to tell a story in this fashion? Because even though I've illustrated other, picture book authors' books, you don't think as deeply about when does each story beat need to happen and how many pages in and how do we keep it exciting and entertaining. It's a whole new process, but I feel like writing it myself has given me so much that now when I go to illustrate someone else's book again, I have such a better idea of, I'm able to think about it so much more deeply.
Mm. I like that. I'm glad you brought up world building too, because this is fantasy. You did have to create a world. Like how much did you get to know the world and the characters in it before you started telling a story? Did you kind of discover them along the way?
For me, it was really a process of building all of the pieces first, and then the story came together as the pieces fell into place. So it was really like, I'm just going to approach this as an illustration project first. And then as I was doing that, it was kind of like the story formed around those pieces. So I was like, let's design a baker and let's design the bakery. And maybe it has a back door and maybe he shows up to that back door. It was like, every little piece that I designed kind of led into the next piece of the story that came together. But I think that's more about like just how my particular brain works as, as someone who's very, very visually minded.
Hmm. Was there anything or any moments that were particularly challenging in creating this story, like parts that you got hung up on, or anything that you remember standing out as like a particularly difficult obstacle?
I think one of the difficulties with telling a story that it like has a beginning, middle, and end in a picture book is that you have to really try to trim all of the fat from it. And it can be hard sometimes. You have to actually let the readers, even though they're really young, like make some leaps of understanding. You don't have the space to spell out every single thing for them, which that was, I think, a hurdle for me to jump over because I'm thinking, oh, but is a 4-year-old going to be able to make this connection? But the thing is, like, in actually like having my friends' kids like read this book, like they actually do make those connections. You can give them a lot more, you can give them the benefit of the doubt that they can fill in the blanks and that you can just tell them only what needs to be said. I think
Mm,
getting to that point mentally was kind of the hurdle to overcome.
sure, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then on the other side of the token, so that was the challenge. Was there anything in particular that was like your favorite part of telling the story?
Oh man, I loved just getting the chance to like get to know the main character and like what his personality is like because he's like a little bit sly, like he's very very sweet and charming, but he's also like just like 10% devious and I feel like I relate to that very much. So it was fun to like get to draw him and figure out his like silly little facial expressions and when he's washing his hands have him look over his shoulder and make a funny face. I think that was my favorite part.
That's a perfect segue because my next question was to ask you about Ember, the main character, the cute dragon that's on the front. So talk to me about Ember. Like, how did you get to know him? Like, what were your steps in developing him?
I think that for me, he has a lot of the kind of energy that I had when I was a little kid, where I feel like I was very naive and very sweet, and I didn't fit in perfectly with, the other kids around me. I was pretty different. I had different interests, and I feel like I didn't always know like the media that they were into. Sometimes my likes and interests were really different. So I think I channeled a lot of that into Ember. But then also there's this layer, like I said, on top of him where he's just a little bit like he thinks a lot. He's a deep thinker and he's always those gears are turning. He's always plotting just a little bit, which I think I relate to a lot as well.
And you mentioned being a very visual thinker. Did you have to see him before you could really get him, or were you already sort of concocting what he would be like before you started drawing him?
he is a character design that came to me really directly. Like I feel like I really understood what I wanted him to look like right away because he's so cute and tiny and round, but then he's also really spiky. And I feel like that like combination between the two is the same kind of thing that's going on with his personality just a little bit. And I feel like that visual representation of that like adorable little pot belly and those big feet, but then he's also like covered in little spikes, like that combination, I just knew right away that that's what I wanted him to look like.
I love that. And since we're on the subject, I wonder if we could see a drawing demonstration now, if we could switch over to the watch and draw portion of this and have you share screen and walk us through drawing Ember and how that would look.
Absolutely. So, like I mentioned, the thing that's really fun about Ember is that he is really round and really spiky. He's a really fun combination of the two. So what I usually do is start with his roundness and then I add in the spikes after the fact. So, if you've done a drawing tutorial before, you've probably seen someone using a really loose circle for the head. And I just draw his little mouthpiece directly off of that. And I actually like to give him his smile first. It's just a little bit crooked, and he's often got a little snaggle tooth there. Then I give him his eye, and always a little glint in his eye. He's always got a little bit of sparkle going on. And then he's got a really round little face. And as we turn around the back of his head, there's a couple layers of spikes. So the first layer of spikes that's closest to his face, he's got this middle spike. And then a second spike comes down here. And he's got the lower level spike. And then on the back of his head, he actually has a second layer of spikes. So I just sneak those two in right there, which brings him down to his cute little neck. And he's got another kind of round little belly area that comes off of his body. I was very inspired by Disney movies, like in The Lion King and the Aristocats. The animals always have this adorable little bean-shaped body, which I gave him. He's got another spike that comes off his neck, got his little shoulder, and his leg that comes down, and his big adorable paws or hands. He really uses them as hands. And he sits just like a little kitten, or more like a puppy. He's got puppy shapes more than anything. And then he's got a spiky tail with two layers, and they're both triangles. And then it forms a little triangle point. And then we got to give him his wings, of course, and those start kind of right behind his shoulder blades here. And I just create a little over and up, and then over again, and he's got a little spike right on the little bend of his wing. And then his wing makes two swooshes, two little C shapes, and divides right in the middle. And then we got to give him a shadow. Little indication that there's another wing going on back there. And maybe a little tiny baby fire breath, and that's Ember.
That was my favorite part. His little tiny fire breath was so cute. He tried to be intimidating and it didn't go out so well.
Yeah, he tries so hard, but he's just a little too cute for that.
So was this all you mentioned being round and spiky? Were there other iterations you had considered, or was this always going to be how he was going to look?
Yeah, I just drew him once and was like, yep, that's Ember. So, some stories I do a bunch of versions of the characters, and actually I did a bunch of designs for the other dragons in the background to try to get to my favorites. But for Ember, I feel like I just saw him fully formed in my head and went straight with that right away.
I love that. And you mentioned the other dragons. I'm curious because they all have such a distinct look and style. How did you go about finding their looks?
Yeah, so I based all of the other dragons off of different reptiles. So I would look around online. I would find a cool reptile with something like head fins, or back fins, or spikes. Like bearded dragons and crested geckos. They all have different shapes to them. And as soon as I found a lizard or a gecko that had cool shapes, I would then channel that into my next design of one of the dragons in the book.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here and say, if you were to create a new dragon, how would that process look? Like, how would you go about starting that and finding this new character?
So I would start by picking a gecko or a lizard that I haven't drawn before and turning that into a design. So one that I think might be cool could be like a leopard gecko. Like maybe I could design one that has spots, and they're pretty cute little guys. They're like low riders. They're very low to the ground. So let me see if I can design a little leopard gecko dragon. Like maybe we would, just to contrast with Ember, maybe we would put the low rider gecko dragon right on the ground over just a little bit. Give him a low body shape. I wanted all of the shapes to be really different between all the
Mm,
dragons. I didn't want them to be too repetitive.
mhm,
So, you know, I gave some really long, like Eastern dragon style bodies, and then I gave others like really wide American dragon style designs. And then I also gave them all pretty different wings. So, like maybe this guy has rounded wings instead of the same spiky wings that Ember has. I just want them all to feel really different. And also, the more different your character designs are, the least accurate you need to be to them in each page. Because if they're different enough, if there are tiny variations between how they look from page to page, people won't notice as much. Got to give it some spikes if it's
mm.
going to be, or spots if it's going to be a leopard gecko. And of course, a big round tail. And any kids who have leopard geckos knows you have to be really careful with their tail because they can drop their tail if you if you make them feel too afraid. We give it some little body spikes and a back wing and maybe some tail spikes too. Spikes turn a lizard into a dragon. I don't make the rules. That's just how it works.
Absolutely.
So there would be my little gecko dragon character.
I love it. You make it look so easy. And is this so, this is all obviously digitally. Do you do all of your drawings digitally, or is this your preferred medium? Do you also do paper and ink?
I love thumbnailing and sketching traditionally. So I have like actual physical sketchbooks that have the first drafts of like all of my book ideas, including the Bakery Dragon. But then as soon as I get into the stage where I need to be like iterating and changing things a lot, I like to move to fully digital just so that it's easier for me to make those changes quickly and to use the transform tool. Like, for example, if I wanted to make his head a lot bigger, I could just do this really
Mm,
quickly, and it makes the whole drawing process for me faster because I don't always know exactly what I want right away. And it is so helpful for me to have be able to, you know, use the digital tools to make quick changes and not eat up too much time in the schedule having to completely redraw things.
hmm. And do you have, so we've talked a lot about dragons. Do you have a favorite character to draw? It can be a dragon, but outside of dragons too, like what do you have favorite species? Do you like humans? What do you like to draw whenever you're sitting there, creating things?
Oh yeah, you know, I do love drawing people. I would say that you know, outside of that, I really love painting environments, and I think that anyone who reads the book probably would be able to guess that too because I spend a lot of time on those as well. I love making environments that feel like characters and they do a lot of storytelling too. Like I want every location that I paint to feel like it has a personality and a history, and I love that aspect of art. Like I love if I'm painting a character's bedroom, I get to tell you so much about that character from the things that I put into the bedroom, like what their hobbies are and what they spend their time doing. Like that really excites me a lot.
I wonder if you could expand on that in the context of the Bakery Dragon, what you did with the world there. Like, were there specific steps that you took to give that more personality?
Yeah, so I really wanted the bakery to feel lived in. I wanted it to feel like a place like Beatrice the baker, it's Bee's Bakery. I wanted it to really feel like her space that was designed exactly the way that she would want to work in it. So when I was designing it, you know, I was putting things in places that I thought would be convenient, not necessarily the most, beautiful layout. Like she has a whole bunch of different tables that are different heights depending on if she's sitting on a stool or sitting on a barrel. She's got, the sacks of flour kind of all over because she wants to be able to grab them easily. She's got towels and pots and pans like hanging up all over because it's like the most convenient place for her to put them. So I like to think about like if I were her, if I was walking around this space, like where would I want each element of the room to be so that I could grab it easily so that, I could do baking in the fastest way possible.
That's so cool to hear. I love hearing creators and how they like, especially with small details, like what goes into creating those little things and hearing the intention behind it. It's just awesome to hear. So thank you so much for sharing and thank you for showing us Ember and this awesome leopard gecko dragon who I hope to see again because he's really cool. I like him.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I grew up with green iguanas and I always wanted a leopard gecko too, but I had so many iguanas there was no room for a gecko. So I'm adopting this little
Man.
guy here.
Yeah. Sadly, lizards don't get along.
No, they don't. All right, awesome. Well, Devin, is there anything else you want to throw out there before I let you go? And anything you want to say either about Bakery Dragon, which comes out October 1st, I want to say it's
October
just around the
1st.
corner. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it'll be out probably by the time this video goes up. So if you're hearing this right now, it's probably on shelves like at this moment. So you should go get it. Anyway, Devin, anything else you want to throw out there before I let you
Oh
go?
man, maybe just keep an eye out. I have another book that's going to be coming out next year that is just one that I illustrated. Well, not just, but I one that I illustrated called Seven Ways Through the Woods. So that one will be coming, I think, September of 2025.
Can you if these are spoilers, you don't have to say anything, but can you tell us anything about that project?
Yeah, so that was another project that I illustrated. So it was written by Jen Reese, who's an amazing author of currently middle grade books, and I believe this is the first picture book. And it's about the magic of forests, and it's about kids playing with magical creatures in the forest. There's a griffin involved. I think that if there are fans of fantasy creatures, they will be excited by the contents of that book as well.
This is amazing. It was funny because when you were drawing the leopard gecko, the wings reminded me of a griffin's wings. So it's funny you should mention a griffin's.
Yep, yeah, maybe I've just got griffins on my head.
Awesome. Well, Devin, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was really fun.
All right. And everybody, thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.